The orbital psychiatric wing hummed with a soft glow of bioluminescent walls, their pulsing light syncing with the neural patterns of its patients. Dr. Vexis adjusted her 6 eyes, each iris dilating independently as she scrolled through the latest case file. The holographic display flickered, casting eerie shadows across her chitinous forehead. "Captain Ryan Blake," she murmured, her voice a melodic ripple. "Species, human diagnosis, combat psychosis." The file played a looping vid feed, grainy, chaotic. A lone figure in torn combat armor stood in a ruined corridor, surrounded by the twitching corpses of Vorac warriors. His knife dripped black ichor, his laughter echoed through the carnage. Nurse Jix, a Scythian with trembling antennae, floated closer. "The council insists on immediate treatment," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the station's ambient hum. "They say his actions are unnatural." Vexis tapped a claw against the display, freezing the image. Blake's face filled the screen, bloodied, grinning, eyes alight with something the Zephyrian couldn't name. "Define unnatural," she said. Jix's antennae twitched. "No species fights like that. Not without stimulants, not without fear." She hesitated. The Vorac called it the laughing death. "They say he killed 300 alone." A chime sounded. The door to the observation chamber hissed open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered figure. Blake stepped inside, his boots thudding against the floor with a weight that made the gravity plating groan. He wore standard, issue patient garb, the fabric straining across his shoulders. "Doc," he said, nodding at Vexis. His voice was rough, amused. "Heard you got stuck with the crazy human." Vexis pulsed her empathy nodes, soft violet ripples cascading down her neck. Standard procedure for establishing rapport. Blake's pupils dilated slightly, but his smirk never wavered. "Captain Blake," she began, gesturing to the adaptive chair. It molded itself to his frame as he sat. "The Federation is concerned about your psychological state." Blake chuckled, leaning back. "Which part, the stabbing, the laughing, or the part where I won?" Jix flinched. Vexis kept her node steady. "Your actions defy standard survival instincts. No galactic species charges into certain death." Blake's grin widened. "You keep saying that like it is a bad thing." The walls flickered, projecting Blake's brain scans. Wild, erratic spikes where other species would show fear responses. Jix's mandibles clicked nervously. His neural activity is chaotic, even now. Blake glanced at the scans, then back at Vexis. "So what is the verdict? Doc, am I broken?" Vexis hesitated. The file listed his physical stats: enhanced musculature, accelerated healing, pain tolerance off the charts. But it was the psychological markers that unsettled her. Elevated dopamine during combat. Endorphin surges at the sight of enemy blood. "Your people call this bravery," she said carefully. Blake stretched, cracking his neck. "Nah, bravery's when you're scared but do it anyway." He tapped his temple. This is just Tuesday." A soft alarm blipped. Jix stiffened. His stress levels aren't spiking at all. Vexis studied him. "You feel no fear." Blake shrugged. "Fear's useful, lets you know you're alive." He leaned forward. Elbows on knees. "But Doc, let me ask you something." His voice dropped, low and conspiratorial. "When your back's against the wall and there is no way out, what do you do?" Vexis blinked. "Surrender is always an option." Blake laughed, a deep, rolling sound that made Jix's exoskeleton rattle. "Yeah, that is where we're different." He stood, stretching. "You call it madness. We call it another day at the office." The door hissed again. An orderly, a hulking Graythian with 4 arms, peered in. "Session's over. Council wants him prepped for evaluation. Blake saluted Vexis with 2 fingers. Till next time, Doc. As the door sealed behind him, Jix exhaled sharply. They'll never understand him. Vexis watched the brain scan's pulse, the erratic spikes forming patterns no Zapperian therapist had ever mapped. No, she murmured, but I think he understands us just fine. The screen flickered back to the feed Blake standing atop a pile of Vorac corpses, howling laughter into the smoke-filled air. Jix shuddered. Vexis closed the file. The words, "Combat Psychosis," glowed ominously before winking out. Somewhere in the station's depths, a human whistled an off-key tune. The walls trembled. The therapy chamber hummed softly as the walls pulsed between calming shades of blue and violet. The adaptive gravity field adjusted subtly beneath them, a standard feature meant to ease stress responses across species. Captain Ryan Blake sat sprawled in the patient chair, one boot propped up on the edge of the floating diagnostic table. His relaxed posture made Dr. Vexis' 6 eyes narrow in disapproval. The Zapperian therapist's empathy nodes flickered amber as she consulted her holographic notes. Captain Blake, your file states you sustained 17 separate injuries during the defense of Outpost Gamma, yet you refused medical evacuation. Her voice carried the melodic lilt of her species, though the underlying tension was unmistakable. Blake grinned, rubbing the scar along his jawline. 17 felt like more. But yeah, the evac was busy hauling out the Vorac I piled up in the kill zone. Figured I'd walk it off. Vexis nodes darkened to a concerned purple. You were bleeding from multiple lacerations, had 2 fractured ribs, and showed signs of plasma burns. Standard protocol dictates immediate withdrawal. Protocols for species that die when you poke 'em too hard. Blake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Doc, you ever seen a human adrenaline dump? We don't feel pain the same way you guys do. Not in the moment. A small holographic display flickered to life between them, showing Blake's biometrics from the battle, spiking heart rate, off the charts neural activity. Vexis gestured to the erratic lines. This is not normal physiology. No civilized species operates at this level of systemic stress without catastrophic breakdown. Blake chuckled. Breakdown's what happens to the other guy. Vexis' primary eyes narrowed while her secondary clusters dilated, a Zapperian sign of frustration. Captain, your psychological profile indicates a pathological disregard for self-preservation. During your last evaluation, you described the Vorac assault as a good time. Hey, context matters. They were between me and my squad. You ever hear what human mothers tell their kids? If you're gonna be dumb, you gotta be tough. Blake's grin didn't reach his eyes. We don't get to be dumb, so we get real damn tough. The walls shifted suddenly to a warning orange as Vexis nodes flared crimson. Your species' survival training includes consuming toxic indigenous wildlife. You voluntarily ate venom, wasp larvae during your endurance trials. Blake shrugged. Tasted like shrimp, little spicy. Those larvae contain enough neurotoxin to kill a fully grown thorian in 3 seconds. Vex's voice hit a rare sharpness, her usually smooth tones cracking. Yeah, if you're dumb enough to chew, Blake mimed, swallowing a pill. Whole thing goes down easy. Stomach acid does the rest. Hell, half our delicacies back home would put you in a coma. Vex's secondary hands twitched toward her emergency sedation kit before she forced them still. This is precisely what the Federation finds concerning. Rational beings do not ingest poison for recreation. Who said anything about recreation? Blake's smile faded. It is training. You ever been stranded behind enemy lines, Doc? No rations, no support, just you and whatever won't kill you faster than starvation will? He tapped his temple. We don't cross the line because we're crazy. We cross it so we know exactly where it is. The room's ambient lighting flickered as the station's AI adjusted the environment. Vexis took a measured breath, her nodes cycling through calming patterns. Your file also mentions auditory hallucinations during extreme stress. Multiple squadmates reported you laughing during the outpost gamma engagement. Blake's expression turned thoughtful. You ever hear a Vorac war cry? Sounds like a garbage disposal eating a live cat. Now imagine 300 of those bastards coming at you. He leaned back, folding his arms. Yeah, I laughed. Because in that moment, I knew two things. One, they'd never seen anything like me before. And two, his teeth flashed. They were about to. Vexis' notes hovered forgotten as her primary eyes locked onto Blake's. You understand how this appears to the Federation? Yes, this is not bravery. This is psychosis. Doc, let me ask you something. Blake's voice dropped, all humor gone. When your back's against the wall, and there is no way out, what does your species do? We Vexis hesitated. We accept the inevitable with dignity. Blake nodded slowly. Yeah, see, that is the difference. We don't believe in inevitabilities. He spread his hands. You call it madness. We call it Tuesday. The silence stretched. Vexis nodes pulsed erratically, cycling through colors too fast to track. The diagnostic table emitted a soft chime. Her empathy sensors had overloaded. Blake stood, stretching his shoulders. Look, I get it. You're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But here is the thing, Doc. He tapped his chest. We're not the peg, we're the damn hammer. The door slid open as their session timer expired. Blake gave a casual salute as he walked out, leaving Vexis staring at her fried diagnostic equipment. In the observation room next door, two Scythian nurses exchanged glances. One whispered, "Did he just break the therapist?" The other watched Blake's retreating form through the glass. I think he broke the whole damn system. The debate orbs in the Federation Council chambers pulsed with agitated energy, casting shifting hues across the tiered rows of alien representatives. Admiral Krell's massive chitinous form dominated the central podium, his scarred carapace clicking with barely contained fury. The Vorac warlord's forearms slammed down on the console, sending ripples through the floating orbs that recorded the proceedings. Enough of this farce. Krell's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustics. Captain Blake represents everything wrong with human integration. His file lists 17 separate incidents of reckless endangerment, each one a violation of standard combat doctrine. A murmur passed through the assembled delegates. The insectoid Zepyrians clicked their mandibles in agreement, while the floating Cerellians dimmed their bioluminescence in distress. Only the small contingent of human observers remained still, their expressions unreadable. Dr. Vexis floated forward on her anti-grav disc, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. With respect, Admiral, your assessment ignores context. Captain Blake's actions consistently result in mission success and minimal casualties. Krell's antennae twitched violently. Success, at what cost? His last engagement saw him abandon cover to charge a fortified position, with nothing but... The Admiral's voice caught as he consulted his datapad. A sharpened mess kit. This isn't tactics. It is insanity. The holographic display activated, showing security footage from Blake's most recent deployment. The grainy image showed the human captain standing alone in a ruined plaza, his uniform torn and bloody. As a squad of armored Vorac advanced, Blake suddenly grinned and sprinted directly at them, howling something unintelligible. The recording cut off as the first Vorac soldier went down, his helmet caved in by what appeared to be a rock wrapped in cloth. Standard protocol dictates retreat when outnumbered 5-1, snapped a Scythian medic from the observation gallery. Human neural responses to danger are clearly aberrant. Our scans show dopamine spikes during combat trauma. A new voice cut through the chamber. That is because we're winning. Colonel Hayes of the Terran delegation stood, his artificial left hand gleaming under the orb lights. You keep analyzing our brain chemistry when you should be studying our history. Every major human victory came from someone doing the impossible. Krell's mandibles spread in what passed for a Vorac sneer. Your definition of victory is as flawed as your psychology. Blake's own squad reports being terrified by his actions. The display changed to show after-action interviews with Blake's unit. A young Zephyrian lieutenant's antennae quivered as she spoke. We thought he was suicidal, until we realized he'd drawn all the enemy fire so we could flank them. The recording switched to a hulking Seralian heavy gunner. Captain took out their commander with a piece of rebar. We just mopped up after. Dr. Vexis manipulated her console, bringing up new data. Admiral, consider the statistical reality. Blake's company has the highest survival rate in the sector. His recklessness consistently preserves more lives than it risks. The chamber lights flickered as debate orbs collided overhead. Krell's carapace darkened with frustration. You're missing the fundamental point. War isn't about individuals. It is about unit cohesion. What happens when every species starts emulating this? This madness. A sudden silence fell as the main doors hissed open. Blake himself strode into the chamber, his dress uniform crisp, despite the fresh scar across his forehead. Every eye in the room followed him as he took position beside Dr. Vexis. Sorry I'm late, Blake said, ignoring protocol. Had to help some cadets recalibrate the combat simulators. He glanced at the frozen image of himself mid-charge on the display. Ah, the mess kit incident. Good times. Krell's claws unsheathed with an audible snick. You dare interrupt, actually, Blake interrupted, tapping his wrist display. I was invited. Seems the good doctor wanted me to explain something. He nodded to Vexis, who activated a new recording. The hologram showed Blake's squad during the Battle of Tarsis Ridge. Instead of the expected chaos, the footage revealed precise choreography. Human soldiers covering alien comrades, Blake directing fire with hand signals. The entire unit moving as one. Then came the moment when Blake charged, drawing enemy attention, while his Zephyrian lieutenant flanked unseen. You see, Vexis said softly. The madness has method. Human combat psychology creates opportunities where others see only despair. Blake shrugged. We just call it the play. Every soldier knows their part. He pointed at the frozen image of his grinning face mid-charge. That is not insanity, Admiral. That is the look of a man who knows his friends are about to win. Krell's claws retracted slowly. The debate orbs overhead stabilized as the Admiral studied the footage with new understanding. This changes nothing, he growled, but the conviction had left his voice. The Federation cannot endorse. The chamber alarms bled to life. Red emergency lights replaced the gentle orb glow as a synthetic voice announced. Security breach. All personnel to emergency stations. Blake was already moving, his relaxed demeanor replaced by focused intensity. As the other delegates scrambled, he grabbed Krell's armored forearm. Admiral, where are your nearest Marines stationed? Krell's compound eyes refocused. Why would you? Because whatever's coming, Blake said with that terrifying human grin. You'll want someone crazy enough to stop it. The simulation chamber hummed to life, its walls dissolving into a holographic war zone. Dr. Vexis adjusted her empathy nodes, their usual blue pulse now flickering orange with concern. Across from her, Captain Ryan Blake cracked his knuckles, his boots already digging into the shifting terrain of Proxima, Faye's infamous killing fields. Standard therapeutic scenario, Vexis announced, her voice echoing through the artificial atmosphere. You are outnumbered 12-1 by Vorac shock troops. Optimal survival protocol dictates immediate retreat to extraction point Gamma. Blake squinted at the horizon where crimson storm clouds boiled. Retreat, that is your big therapy breakthrough. Run away. Preservation instinct is universal, Vexis said, her secondary eyes tracking Blake's elevated heart rate. Even Vorac warriors disengage when a proximity alarm shrieked. The ground trembled as 12 Vorac battleforms materialized, their chitinous armor glistening with simulated bloodlust. Standard Federation therapy protocol demanded the patient experience overwhelming odds to trigger surrender reflexes. Blake didn't move. "Initiate retreat sequence," Vexis ordered. The medical AI chimed in. "Path calculated 73% survival probability if withdrawal begins now." The Vorac raised their plasma casters in unison. Blake yawned. Then his hands flew across the simulation control panel. Warning glyphs flashed as he overrode safety protocols. The holographic terrain shimmered, the Proxima Fey wasteland melting into. "What are you doing?" Vexis's empathy nodes flared crimson. "You can't modify prescribed. Welcome to the Alamo," Blake said as ancient stone walls erupted around them. A tattered flag with a single star snapped in the digital wind somewhere. A lone trumpet played. The Vorac shock troops hesitated, their tactical subroutines scrambling to process the anachronistic battlefield. Blake vaulted onto a makeshift parapet, scooping up a holographic musket that hadn't existed seconds earlier. "You wanted to understand human madness?" He racked the musket's lever with a satisfying clack. "Class is in session." Vexis's medical sensors overloaded as Blake opened fire, not retreating, not hiding. The human moved along the wall with terrifying precision, his simulated weapon spitting lead every Fei seconds. An impossible reload speed her database claimed no primitive firearm could achieve. "Your historical records are incomplete," Blake called over the gunfire. He tossed the musket aside and caught a falling cannonball barehanded. San Antonio, Fei 200 against 5,000, lasted 13 days. A Vorac leapt the wall. Blake met it with a bayonet thrust to the thorax. The alien dissolved into pixels, but 10 more poured through the breach. "Statistical impossibility." Vexis's voice cracked. "The simulation calculates 0% survival chance." Blake laughed as he swung a broken chair leg through a Vorac's mandibles. "That is why they remember it." The Zephyrian therapist stumbled back as the scene unfolded with horrifying clarity. Blake wasn't just fighting. He was performing. Every ricochet, every graze, every near, mischoreographed like some deranged ballet. When his powder horn emptied, he ripped a pipe from the wall and kept fighting. 47 minutes. Blake panted as the last Vorac evaporated. The Alamo stood barely. He leaned against a shattered post, blood dripping from a dozen superficial wounds. The simulation insisted should have been fatal. That is how long it took them to realize we don't break. Vexis's tentacles trembled as she reviewed the data. Blake's vitals showed endorphin spikes with each near-death experience. His pupils dilated at the scent of simulated gunpowder. Most disturbing of all, he'd been humming. What was that auditory pattern you vocalized during combat?" Blake wiped sweat from his brow. "HFY DC, thunderstruck. Good fighting music." The therapy chamber reverted to its sterile white. Blake stretched, rolling his shoulders like he'd just finished a light workout. Vexis stared at her readouts, her empathy node cycling through colors no Zephyrian had ever produced during a session. "You rewrote the simulation parameters," she whispered. "Accessed historical databases our psychologists never catalogued." Blake tossed the pipe aside with a clatter. "Doc, you keep trying to fix what ain't broken. That madness you're so worried about." He tapped his temple. "That is the secret sauce. While your species evolved better hiding spots, we evolved better reasons to come out swinging." The medical AI chimed. "Patient exhibits zero trauma response to simulated combat. Unprecedented in Federation records. Suggested diagnosis." "Diagnosis this," Blake said, kicking the projector array. The entire chamber flickered, momentarily reverting to the Alamo's courtyard, where a single human silhouette stood against an army of shadows. Then it was gone. Vexis's voice came out strangled. No civilized species behaves this way. Blake grinned. Good thing we never claimed to be civilized. He patted the shuddering Zephyrian on the shoulder. Say me time next week. I'll bring the mixtape. The medical hub's calm shattered like glass. Alarms screamed through the corridors as the station shuddered from multiple impacts. Dr. Vexis' 6 eyes dilated in unison when the emergency lights bathed the therapy chamber in pulsing crimson. Containment breach, blared the AI voice. Vorac separatists have boarded Sector Blue. Blake was already moving before the announcement finished. He ripped the biosensor pads from his chest, the adhesive tearing skin. Across the room, Scythian nurse Tixel trembled, her bioluminescent stripes flashing panic yellow, standard protocol. Tixel chirped, her 4 hands clutching a medical scanner like a shield. We must hide and hope they don't check the closets. Blake grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her toward a supply locker. Get in, don't make a sound. The first plasma cutter burned through the door before she could protest. Molten metal dripped onto the floor as 3 Vorac warriors clambered through the breach. Their chitinous armor clicked with each movement, compound eyes scanning the room. Human, hissed the lead Vorac, mandibles spreading in recognition. The defective one. Blake didn't answer. He flipped the surgical tray beside him, sending instruments clattering across the floor. The Vorac chuckled, a wet gurgling sound, as Blake picked up a bone saw. You think that frightens us? The Vorac raised his plasma rifle. Primitive. Blake thumbed the saw's trigger. The high-pitched whine drowned out the Vorac's next words as the diamond-edged blade spun to life. Then he moved. The first Vorac died mid-laugh, the saw carving through his rifle arm before biting deep into his thorax. Chitin splintered. Blue blood sprayed across the walls as Blake wrenched the blade sideways. The second warrior lunged, serrated forelimbs slashing, only for Blake to duck and drive the saw upward through his jaw. The third Vorac backpedaled, firing wildly. Plasma bolts scorched the ceiling as Blake rolled behind an overturned exam table. Medical hub pay system, Blake muttered, tapping his wristcom. The station-wide channel crackled to life. Attention Vorac assholes. Blake's voice echoed through every corridor. This is Captain Ryan Blake, United Earth Marines. You wanted to study human madness. A pause. The saw revved again. Therapy's over. Now it is triage. 3 decks away, Dr. Vexis froze mid-evacuation. The security feed on her datapad showed Blake stepping over Vorac corpses, his hospital gown soaked blue. He'd welded the bone saw to a broken force stand, creating a makeshift halberd. More Vorac converged on his position. 12 this time, heavy assault units with powered armor. Blake grinned. He kicked open an emergency panel and yanked out a fistful of cables. The station's gravity generator stuttered. For 3 glorious seconds, the corridor became a 0G kill zone. Vorac warriors flailed as Blake launched himself off the wall, saw blade humming. Tixel watched through the locker vents as Blake moved like a storm. He used everything, shattered glass as throwing stars, a detached hydraulic piston as a club, even a stray plasma bolt to ignite an oxygen line and cook 2 Vorac in their shells. When the gravity stabilized, only Blake remained standing. He wiped blue blood from his face with the tattered remains of his gown. Clear! He shouted toward the lockers. Tixel emerged, trembling. Blake tossed her a scavenged Vorac sidearm. Next wave's coming, he said, checking the saw's battery. You know how to use that? Tixel's stripes pulsed uncertainly. Theoretical training only, Scythians are pacifist. Today you're human. Blake grabbed a fallen Vorac's plasma cutter and shoved it into her upper hands. Point the glowy end at bad guys. The station shook again. Distant screams echoed through the vents somewhere. Bulkheads failed. Blake cracked his neck. Stay behind me. Watch your corners. Tixel stared at the weapon in her hands, then at the carnage surrounding them. This This isn't standard procedure. Blake's grin was all teeth. Welcome to humanity. The next wave hit like a tide. 20 Vorac 30. They kept coming. Blake kept killing. By the time Federation Marines retook the sector, they found Blake sitting on a pile of Vorac corpses, stitching a gash on his thigh with a surgical stapler. The bone saw lay beside him, its motor burned out from overuse. Tixel stood guard nearby, her borrowed plasma cutter still smoking. Her bioluminescence had settled into a steady, determined red. The Marine lieutenant gaped. You held the entire medical wing with a saw. Blake shrugged. Had a good nurse. Outside, the wreckage of 3 Vorac assault ships drifted against the stars. The medical hub's bioluminescent spires flickered irregularly, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. The corridor stank of ionized metal and burnt chitin. Emergency lights pulsed red through the smoke, casting long shadows from the twisted wreckage of what had been a state-of-the-art medical facility. Somewhere in the distance, a containment field failed with a shriek of protesting energy. Dr. Vexis picked her way through the debris, her 6 eyes straining against the haze. Her empathy nodes throbbed painfully, not from the carnage, but from the sheer, overwhelming certainty radiating from the human at the center of it all. She found Blake sitting against a half-melted bulkhead, his hospital gown torn and streaked with alien blood. He had one knee propped up, a stolen Vorac plasma pistol resting lazily across it. His other hand was busy stitching a gash on his forearm with a medical stapler, each click punctuated by a soft grunt. A severed Vorac claw lay beside him like a trophy. You're hurt, Vexis said, her voice modulator skipping slightly. Blake glanced up, his teeth flashing in a grin that made 2 of her eyes involuntarily narrow. Nah, this is just a scratch. He tugged the last staple into place and flexed his arm. See, good as new. Vexis's primary eyes flicked to the bodies littering the corridor. 12 Vorac warriors, each killed with brutal efficiency. One had its skull caved in by what looked like a fire extinguisher. Another sprawled near a shattered viewport, its carapace split open by something sharp and improvised. You rewired the emergency bulkhead controls, Vexis observed. The doors had sealed at the perfect moment, cutting off the Vorac reinforcements. Blake shrugged. Figured if I was going to play doctor, I might as well do some surgery. He patted the Vorac claw. Turns out they don't like losing limbs any more than we do. Vexis's nodes pulsed again, this time with something uncomfortably close to awe. You could have died. So could you, Blake said, suddenly serious. He jerked his chin toward the closet behind her. That nurse still in there? Vexis nodded. The Scythian had been trembling when she'd checked on it, but unharmed. You shielded it, even after it called you defective during your intake. Blake snorted. Yeah, well, we've got this saying back home. Don't be a dick. He levered himself up with a groan, scooping up the Vorac claw and tossing it once in his hand. Besides, you don't let civilians get chewed up just 'cause they don't like you. That is our job. A distant explosion rattled the station somewhere. A Federation distress beacon warbled to life. Vexis hesitated, then activated her recorder. Final notes on patient Blake, Ryan human designation, Homo sapiens. She watched as he limped toward the sound of fighting, pausing only to scoop up a broken pipe. Diagnosis revised. Subject does not suffer from combat psychosis. Human neural responses to extreme stress appear to be evolutionary adaptations. Suppression of despair pathways, hyper-accelerated threat assessment. And she trailed off as Blake vanished around the corner, his laughter echoing back down the hall. She finished quietly, and an unparalleled refusal to acknowledge futility as a concept. The Federation Council watched the security feeds in silence. Admiral Krell's mandibles twitched as Blake's grinning, blood-streaked face filled the screen, his voice crackling over the audio. Hey Doc, tell the nice folks watching at home, this what they wanted to see, proof we're broken. The camera shook as he hefted the pipe. Nah, we're just built different. The feed cut to static in the council chambers. Not a single debate orb flickered. Vexis's report scrolled across the main display, her final recommendation bolded. Reclassify human madness as tactical adaptation syndrome. Immediate revision of Federation combat doctrine advised. Somewhere in the darkness of the ruined station, a human whistled an old war tune, and the Vorac hunting him hesitated for the first time in their history. The polished metal walls of the Federation War College reflected the shifting colors of cadet uniforms from 17 species. Captain Ryan Blake stood at the lectern, his scarred hands resting on the smooth surface as hundreds of alien eyes watched him. The air smelled of ozone and nervous pheromones. Let's get one thing straight, Blake said, his voice carrying through the amphitheater without amplification. You all keep calling it insanity. We call it making the other guy die for his cause. A ripple of uneasy clicks and chitters moved through the audience. In the front row, Dr. Vexis adjusted her empathy nodes, their usual blue glow now tinged with amber amusement. Behind her, a hulking Vorac cadet shifted his chitinous plates with a sound like grinding stone. Blake tapped the console, bringing up a hologram of the recent attack on the medical hub. The footage showed him emerging from smoke, surgical tray shield in one hand, bone saw in the other. See this standard human field medicine. When there is no medkit, you improvise. A tiny Scythian cadet raised a trembling appendage. But you used the saw to perform emergency cranial adjustments on 12 Vorac raiders? Blake finished with a grin. Exactly. Medicine isn't just about healing. Sometimes it is about triage, deciding who gets to walk away. The Vorac cadet stood abruptly, his four eyes burning. This is obscene. You glorify violence. Blake didn't blink. No, I understand violence. There is a difference. He changed the display to show the Battle of Proxima. Your textbooks call this a tactical withdrawal. My Marines call it giving the enemy time to regret their life choices. Dr. Vexis cleared her throat, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Captain, perhaps you could explain the psychological framework behind human combat behavior. Sure. Blake leaned against the lectern. You ever hear of the broken escalator phenomenon back on Earth? When an escalator stops working, most species would wait for repairs. Humans, we keep walking. That is all this is. We see a broken system, and instead of freezing up, we keep moving. The hologram shifted to show Blake's infamous simulation hack. Cadets gasped as they watched him turn a standard retreat scenario into a last stand. Your sims are programmed with alien psychology, survival instincts that say, run from certain death. Ours say, take as many with you as possible. A cerulean floating near the ceiling pulsed its bioluminescent nodes. But statistically, your actions should have resulted in death 97.6% of the time. Blake shrugged. Humanity runs on 2% margins. Always have. He tapped the console again, bringing up an image of ancient Earth warriors. 10,000 years ago, my ancestors stood shoulder to shoulder with sharpened sticks against things with claws the size of your arms. You think we'd blink at plasma rifles? Silence fell over the auditorium. Then, from the back, a single pair of hands began clapping. Slowly, others joined. First the Scythians, then the Vespidians, until even the Vorac cadet was tapping his foreclaws together in reluctant respect. After the lecture, Admiral Krell intercepted Blake in the corridor outside. The massive Vorac's chitin still bore the scars from their last encounter. Your methods are unorthodox. Blake smirked. They work. Krell made a grinding sound deep in his thorax. The Vorac High Command has issued new orders regarding human units. He hesitated, mandibles working. Direct engagement is discouraged. Let me guess, Blake said, folding his arms. Psychological contamination risk. Krell's eyes darkened. Your kind spreads more than bullets. You spread ideas, dangerous ones. He turned to leave, then paused. That simulation you ran, the Alamo, what happened to those warriors? Blake's smile didn't reach his eyes. They died, but we remember. 2 weeks later, the Federation Council quietly amended their psychological evaluation protocols. Human combat psychosis was reclassified as adaptive persistence behavior. Dr. Vexis's final report became required reading at all military academies, and across the galaxy, in 100 different languages, soldiers began whispering the same phrase when facing impossible odds. What would a human do? The galaxy feared human madness. Then they realized it is contagious.